So our last bullet point is the nations celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. And that sounds like an odd thing out of nowhere. Your first thought is, what? Nations are going to celebrate the Feast. What about Passover? Isn't that bigger and more important? Actually, there's a good reason for it all. So let's look at our last several verses. Then all the survivors from the nations that came against Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of armies, and to celebrate the Festival of Shelters. That's the same as the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Passover or Sukkoth. Should any of the families of the earth not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of armies, rain will not fall on them. And if the people of Egypt will not go up and enter, then rain will not fall on them. This will be the plague the Lord inflicts on the nations who do not go up to celebrate the Festival of Shelters. This will be the punishment of Egypt and all the nations that do not go up to celebrate the Festival of Shelters. So, not a lot there. And by the way, the end. That's it. He stops. That's the end of the compilation of Zechariah's prophecy. That. In the kingdom age, hey, everybody's going to come to the Feast of Booths. The end. Interesting. But there's purpose in it. So I did sort of the who, what approach. Oh, wow, I just messed up. There we go. Who, what, when, and what if is kind of the approach I took. So the who is all the survivors from the nations that came against Jerusalem. That is Yathar, and that the root word there is the idea of leaving. Something leaving or something left. And the idea here is those who are left, those are left over. Those survivors in our English translation, that's perfect understanding because we just had this big war. That war was ended by Christ. I told you at the time, Christ only wars against the military combatants. The non-combatants, non-military, are not, don't have their faces melted off. So the others are, in Matthew 25, gathered up by angels, dropped into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and the judgment of the Gentiles comes upon them. So those sheep from Jesus' sheep and goat passage in Matthew 25, the goats go into the lake of fire. They're the first group in history to go into the lake of fire, by the way. Nobody's there today. People always talk about he's burning in hell. Nobody's burning in hell right now. He's burning in Hades. It's different. Hades is a container that at the end of Revelation is cast into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the permanent container. Hades at one time was full of the righteous and the unrighteous in separated chambers. That's why Jesus told the story of Lazarus and the rich man in Luke, a story he told coincidentally while his friend Lazarus, the very next thing, if you harmonize the Gospels, the very next thing Jesus does, he tarries there while Lazarus dies. He's telling a story of his friend because he goes and saves the real Lazarus after that. That's another story. So Hades is thrown in the lake of fire. This group is the first group into that actual lake of fire. But the sheep from that judgment are all the believers. They are the ones that are invited into the kingdom. So the kingdom period begins, I've said this before, but it's very important we understand, it begins with all believers. Day one of the Messianic kingdom, only Christians are on the earth. Everybody on the earth knows, believes, trusts in Christ. It's going to be a couple of good years, right? But day one, I'm sure that somewhere, some TV special is going to be celebrating the first baby born in the kingdom. Baby's going to be born that first day probably, and then the next day, every day people are going to be born. At 2 years, we're going to have a bunch of little sin natures showing up, out of all these new babies. And then by the time 10, 12 years have passed, we're going to have children who have not received the Lord. I think that we're going to have better gospel propagation during the kingdom than at any other time for the simple reason that our government is going to be very pro-gospel. I'll tell you a secret I've learned. Watching the last half a dozen political administrations in our own country, we are no different than ancient Israel. You got a godly king, give or take, or an ungodly king, the people will follow. The people will emulate what their government's teaching them they should be doing. That's always been true of humanity. We're all sheep, And when Jesus is king, we're going to have a godly government. Our government, our history books, our classrooms are going to be teaching history from the perspective of God created the heavens and the earth. And then God did this great thing with Israel. And then all of the things that we think is eschatology are going to be history. And in history, they're going to learn about Armageddon. In history, they're going to learn about all the great things in the coming of the king and why no one trains for war anymore, because our king will melt your face off. All of that stuff, everybody learns because our government will be good. And so the propagation of the gospel is going to be, I would think, very sweet. But by the end of that 1,000 years, there will be those who are hardened. There will be those who will not believe. And there's a lot more to that we don't have time for. But right now, at the start of the kingdom, we're all believers. The word nations there, the survivors from the nations, that's an important word because that's goyim. That's the plural of goy, and it means Gentiles. Every time you see goyim, it refers to every nation other than Israel. There are Israelites and there are goyim. It's a running joke in Jewish families. If they have a Gentile friend, that's my goy friend, right? That's my Gentile buddy, you know. The resident goy or the goyim family we invite, you know, to Passover every year. They're very cognizant of the fact that they are Jews, and they're very cognizant of the fact that you're not, because they are God's chosen people. It's why they retained their identity after 1,900 years of exile, as it were. So the goyim, not Israel. Why? Well, Israel doesn't need to be dealt with for reasons we've discussed. At the time the kingdom starts, every Israelite's a believer. Well, so are all the goyim at that moment. But the promise to Israel was that they will all be coming to faith from then on. The Israelites are guaranteed, you know, you want your son to produce godly grandchildren, get him to marry a Jewish girl, you know, because that's just the way the scripture reads. So we don't have a problem with the Jews. They are there in the land. Another reason we don't have a problem with them is because they're in the land. You know, they don't have to sojourn to go to the feast like the other nations will. But we have the goyim, the nations, the other than Israel, Gentiles are to pilgrimage. But it's those nations that came against Jerusalem. So again, we're looking back. And he's saying all the nations that warred against Jerusalem in this big battle of Armageddon we just had. Well, Zechariah 12:3, if you remember, said, all the nations of the earth gather against her. So in case you're wondering what all nations those are, all of them. By the way, when the time comes, that includes us, if we're still here. We are part of the goyim that will war against Israel on that day, unless our country falls, which is possible. Anything's possible. I hope that don't happen. If it does, I hope I'm not here. In fact, I hope nobody that is here remembers my name, except maybe they have a copy of Return of the King and it'll help them through. So the nations that came against Jerusalem. So we're looking back, of course, to Armageddon. That's every nation. And then the wind. They'll go up year after year. So this is annually, every year. Year after year means they're going to consistently. And the way this is written, it seems like if you miss a year, you're going to have a year of judgment, because a year is a long time not to get rain. If you decide you're going to push the limits and not believe your king when he tells you this. But they're going to go up year after year to the Feast of Tabernacles. That was an annual feast. And now we see in this text it's a mandate for the whole earth. And what's interesting to me, and I put that in your notes, no other feast is mentioned. There are actually 3 pilgrimage feasts. Passover's another one. Well, Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is attached to Passover. You don't go to the Feast of Unleavened Bread and not be there for Passover. But that's not mandated here. The Feast of Booths, the Feast of Shelters, or the Feast of Tabernacles, what everybody called it when I was growing up. I think that's King James probably. So what? There are 2 things they are to do. Number 1, to worship the King, the Lord of armies. Number 2, to celebrate the Festival of Shelters. This could be 2 separate ideas, and in a way, I guess it is. We've got the vav separating them, which is the and, but the problem is sometimes an and is connecting to like things, sometimes an and is connecting to dislike things, sometimes it is this and that, and sometimes it's this, that, and the other as a series. And is it two separate things connected by an and, or is it one thing with an and, bridging them? It feels to me in this text that worship the king and celebrate the feast is one sort of notion. You're going to go up, worship the king, and celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, because that's where the king's going to be, is in Jerusalem, where the feast is. So let's talk then about this feast. This is where we almost got a new day, but we didn't. We decided to just roll it in. So Hag HaSukkoth is the word, or Sukkoth, you've seen probably in some of your Bible translations. That is the Feast of Tabernacles, or the feast, as it were. The shelters is Sukkah. So Hag HaSukkah, Feast of the Shelters, or the Tabernacles, is the way that sort of comes across. Sukkah, or Sukkoth, is the word for tabernacle, but it's also the word for tent, booth, pavilion. And in the Old Testament, you see the tabernacle in the sojourn in the wilderness and whatnot. Well, the tabernacle was a tent. It was a big tent that they put up because they were traveling, and everywhere they went, they'd re-erect the tabernacle. So that's the idea. It is, by definition, a temporary dwelling structure. And that's the key to the whole feast. The whole feast is all about the notion of the temporary dwelling. So, the feast itself, it's the 15th of Tishrei. That's late September, early October in our calendar. It is one of 3 feasts in that month, a busy feast month. It was a 7-day feast, but the 8th day is a day of rest. It's really kind of part of the feast too. So it's a 7-day feast with an 8th day, which is an 8-day feast. But for 7 days, you have a holy convocation, I think, at the first, and then on day 8. And during the 7 days of the primary feast, all native Israelites, Leviticus 23, and by the way, there are about 8 Old Testament passages that give legal descriptors and details and requirements of this feast. It's a busy bee of requirements. You have some passages in Numbers that talk about the sacrifices, and just this day, this sacrifice, this day, this sacrifice, this. It's just crazy how much and that's why I almost gave us another week just to talk about it. But we might not have got, if we really did it justice, we might not even got it done in a week. There's a lot that could be known, but what we need to know for tonight, we don't need to study all of that right now. So, 7-day feast, and the Israelites had to live in homemade tents during the week. So the way this translates is in Israel, Feast of Booths, you would build a little shelter outside of your home. There's a bunch, not in your notes, there's a lot of stuff there that we could go into. The roof had to be made of something, what's the word? Something that rots, something compostable. It had to be temporary. By nature of the feast, the whole point of the feast was how frail and temporary the booth was. And God made them live in the tents during that feast. And if you came in for the feast, likewise, you build yourself a little tent to live in during the feast. So I think Jerusalem looked kind of like San Francisco, does today at that moment. It was just a big mess of hobbled together in the modern day. Just imagine cardboard, shelters everywhere. That was the point. Now, I know what you're thinking. What on earth kind of a point is that? Well, the reason Leviticus is given, in Leviticus 23, that your generations, your offspring, can know that I made the people of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. It's a reminder. It is a feast of reminiscence of what we once had to do. By the way, when you remember the hardships of your youth, what does that produce in you? Every time your dad talked about walking 3 miles to school in the snow barefoot, he's telling you to appreciate this warm car and those nice shoes I bought you last week. Right. So yeah, it instigates appreciation for what you have. But we're told the generation can know I made you live in booths. So it's a remembrance of the Exodus, the time in the wilderness when everybody was living in tents. booths, temporary structures. And while they were in the wilderness the whole time, some people their whole lives because of their sin, but that generation, early on and late, I don't imagine a day went by that somebody wasn't thinking, I can't wait to get me a real house, a real place to live, right? And in Leviticus 23, we see the timing of the feast isn't just really the date. The date is important, but the date is set such that it is a harvest feast. It is right after the last summer harvest. The summer harvest in Israel is a milder harvest than the spring harvest because winter is very productive. That's when they get all their rain. But there is yet a harvest in the summer, and there's feasting then after that. And this is a true feast in that sense. This is Thanksgiving-esque. This is Passover-esque. We're gonna eat. And, you know, some of the feasts you don't get to eat much, but these are legit feasts. So it is also a pilgrimage feast. A pilgrimage feast, there are 3 feasts in the Old Testament. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is connected to Passover, so you might as well just say Passover. In fact, Jewish people don't even talk about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They call it Passover. It's all Passover. But it's really a 7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread and then Passover. You have Passover or Unleavened Bread. You have the Feast of Pentecost or the Feast of Weeks and the Feast of Tabernacles. And to be a pilgrimage feast means that every Jewish male who is able. Now, who is able, who's not? The rabbis will give you an excuse for just about anything if you're in good standing, I'm sure. But God knows, and God required, if you're able to get to Jerusalem, you must get to Jerusalem. So if you live 100 miles away, 500 miles away, but you're able, you got to go 3 times a year to Jerusalem. Now, how hard is that? And inconvenient is that to be a Jew outside of the land? But that's how it was. By the way, you think of people like the Ethiopian eunuch, you know. Why was he even in Israel? I don't know exactly on that day, but people, you know, the day of Pentecost in the scriptures, why are they all there? It's a pilgrimage feast. The day of Pentecost, the disciples are in the upper room, and there are all these people from all over the world flooding the city because it was a pilgrimage feast. And it tells us they're from Cappadocia and Galatia. They traveled from long distances. So this is a pilgrimage feast, and in the kingdom, it's a pilgrimage feast. So God says in the passage that this is a remembrance of their sojourn, so it's a commemoration of what they now have. Imagine camping out. Next time your kids grumble about their accommodations, take them camping. Old school, real camping, cowboy camping. Make them pitch a tent, make them build a fire, make them cook their food, make them wash in the creek. Or not at all.
Oh, you had a tent?
Uh-huh.
You had a tent?
Had a tent? Well,
You had a tent? I didn't get a tent.
oh, no, I had a tent, but I got a tent for Christmas because I wanted one, because I was a kid that enjoyed that. I'd rather be out in the sticks than in the house, but as an old man, I favor the house. Yeah, oh, well, but see, I'm all over that. I got really hungry on a couple of our camping encounters. And there were times that we were eating goose for breakfast because we were goose hunting and that's all we had. I didn't bring anything else. We were like cooking goose over open flames, but that's all right. We digress. So, if you make your kid do that, and then you get him home, and he gets to get in his nice bed, and those clean sheets, and the cool side of the pillow, all the things you don't think about until you lose those conveniences, I really do think that's a big part of this feast. Now, there are Messianic kingdom implications to the feast, and that's why this feast is required. Amos 9:11 says, "In that day I will raise up the booth of David that's fallen and repair its breaches, raise up its ruin and rebuild it as in the days of old." That is the picture. The picture is you were in the wilderness, you had no home. God provided you a home after he punished you for a whole generation, allowed you to come to the promised land, to vineyards you didn't plant. You're going to collect harvests you didn't plant. You're going to live in houses you didn't build, because God is dislocating the Canaanites, which are also a part of this text. He's getting rid of all of these people before him that were godless and sinful and pagan, so you can have their place as God's people and show the world the God of Israel is the God you should be serving. So, by the way, in Amos 9, it's talking about the kingdom period. in that text. And so the idea is clear that this picture in Amos of rebuilding, raising up the booth of David, is that there's going to be a falling of Israel and a rebuilding of Israel. This is that day. So when you study the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Booths, you come to the conclusion that the fulfillment of that feast, all of the feasts have a fulfillment, and the fulfillment of the Feast of Booths is the Messianic kingdom. Why? Because everything prior to the Messianic kingdom for Israel has been temporary. Israel today, as we know it, is temporary. It seems like they're in. They got a great society building, but they got Armageddon coming. They're going to lose that. Israel in the past lost it. Israel of the generation Zechariah is talking to lost it, and they were in the process of rebuilding it right now. They understood this idea of what God said, which is when you turn against me, I'm going to send you off to the nations, and you're going to lose it all. And now the promise is when you get to the kingdom period, you're going to have your king. This ain't going to be like the covenant. That's Jeremiah, the new covenant, 31. This won't be like the covenant I made with your forefathers, who though I was a husband to them, they betrayed me, they turned against me. This time I'm going to write my law on your hearts. I'll be their God, they'll be my people. And Zechariah's already told us several different times they will never stray again. Israel is now permanently married to their Messiah. They're going to worship him, be faithful to him. So for the first time, Israel is now guaranteed prophetically a permanent home. That is the fulfillment of the Feast of Booths. Everything you've had before now has been temporary, waiting for this day. Now, in the kingdom period, never again will nations rise against you, never again will you rebel against me, and never again will you be a foreign exile. And it even gets bigger than that. We'll get to that in a second. I'll follow my notes instead of squirreling, because I'm about to squirrel. So we see here then the Gentiles are also required to observe this feast. And what's interesting is, this is really the same reminder for the Gentiles. They didn't sojourn in the wilderness. They didn't live out the experience of Israel. But they, at this point, have all lost their homes too. The tribulation has taken everything from everybody. And so the idea of is in the kingdom, there's going to be a massive rebuilding. There's going to be a restoration. And there's a lot of kingdom things that we haven't dealt with in eschatology. A lot of them are in Isaiah 65, which I'm going to refer to in a minute. But during the kingdom period, Joel talks about the rains being restored, the weather systems being held back. Hurricanes aren't going to come and wipe out your home. Floods aren't going to destroy your crops or your home. In fact, as we look forward with the king on his throne, Jesus is literally going to be in charge of the weather. And the promise then is of his people, before they ask, I will answer. How cool is that? Lord, I really need oh, thank you. That's the good life. That's what the kingdom is. It's the good life. We're in fellowship with the king. The king's providing all of our needs. And nature cooperates. In Isaiah 65, there are a lot of things there. And there are other passages as well. The snakes don't bite your children. Your kids they're not born doomed to misfortune. The idea of birth defects, gone. Nothing bad is going to come upon them. In fact, if you read Isaiah 65, everybody lives out to their old age. And the way that reads is tricky because the unbeliever is accursed at 100 is the way it reads literally. And the idea is that if you're a believer, you don't die. So if you make it to the kingdom and you're 97, you're going to be 1,097 when this thing's over. And hopefully get a new hip. But yeah, that's the picture. You're going to have these long lifespans. Isaiah 65, that the life of a man will be like the life of a tree. Verse 21 specifically says, they'll build houses and inhabit them. And verse 22 says, they will not build houses and someone else inhabit them. Why? The whole purpose of the passage is to say, everybody you know, I was friends with Gary at Rosenberg Tractor. You know, a lot of y'all know him. Guy saves his whole life, buys himself a big old farmland, is going to farm cotton, builds himself a big old brand new nice house and a big old brand new nice barn. And you know the story. Gets cancer and he's dead in a year. I drive by that all the time because it's right out by my house. And I can't help driving by that place. It's full of cotton. Somebody else is farming it. I don't know who. His wife's out there. I've been there in her house trying to help her with her computer a couple times. And golly, that's just such a tragedy. You save up your whole life. You study, make yourself prepared for retirement. Then you get there. There's no guarantees. But in the kingdom, it ain't like that. In the kingdom, you're going to work. Your labor is going to pay off. People aren't going to steal what you have. Your work towards your homestead is going to count. I'm wondering if there are any termites. You know, it doesn't say there aren't, but it sounds like maybe not. Because nature is, if the snakes don't bite the kids, maybe the termites don't bite your house, because God says they're going to build a house and live in it. And 1,000 years is a long time to live in a house. I don't know. But all of that, verse 23, their labor won't be in vain. This is the life everybody's always wanted. So imagine living in that life, especially if you're one of the early adopters and you came into the kingdom from the tribulation. And tribulation is only 7 years. So before the tribulation, you were already adulting. You had your house, you had a job. All of a sudden, everything breaks loose, and you're fighting for your life. There's war everywhere, and you're starving. But you make it through somehow without being murdered by Antichrist. You've come to faith, maybe through the process, maybe, shortly after the rapture, you'd have to be an early convert. But however it works out, you're a believer, you get to that moment, and now you see Christ himself coming in the clouds. You see all of these things. You're there at Jehoshaphat. Angel plucks you up and flutters you over and drops you on Temple Mount behind Jesus, and you're like, yeah! He assigns you a place. This is your homestead. And you go and you start building, and everything works like it's supposed to. How often does that happen for you? Just curious, because I don't know if it's just me. It happened to me yesterday, and it blew my mind. I sincerely thank the Lord for it's a little thing. It's a little thing. But my truck decided yesterday, midday, it just wasn't going to start. It's an old truck at this point. It's not got the gears on it, but, we're approaching 200,000 miles, and things are starting to break. Starter doesn't work. Stephanie's gone, and so when she gets in, I'm crawling under the truck, making her hit it so I can listen, make sure that it is coming from the starter. I hear the click, it's the start. Okay, so it's a bad, solenoid, and it's all one piece now, so I got to go buy a $200 starter. And I'm looking at that thing, and I'm like, oh my gosh. My old Chevy. One big old long bolt. Of course, it weighed 40 pounds. But you pull that thing out, bolt another one in, oh man, this thing, I'm looking at it, and one of the bolts, there's this shape. You can't even see. You know it's in there, but you can't see it, and you can't get a ratchet in it because you've got transmission cooling lines here, and you're laying upside down, looking up at this. Your dog's licking you, wondering why we're on the ground, thinking you're supposed to be. And I'm like, I'm going to be here forever. Would you believe I got that wrench on it? And I got my torque wrench, so I had some oomph. Came right out. And when it went back in, I'm like, I'm never going to get that bolt. But I left it dangling because you can't see it. But I could feel the backside of it. That bolt's right there. And I put the starter back in, and I jiggled my little universal in there. Got it. Start turning. And I'm like, I think it started. And I hit it with my impact. And I got that whole job done in like less than an hour. And I'm literally like, thank you, Lord. I knew this is going to be like an 8-hour ordeal, and I'm going to be like hitting the truck, It's like, because I can't get the bolt in. Because that's the way it usually goes. Not in the kingdom. That's why you must come celebrate the Feast of Booths every year. This isn't just a celebration that God says, I want you to come to church on this day. This is you saying, yes, sir, I get it. I get what it is you've given us. I remember what it was. and I will remember what it is now. And I'm going to worship the Lord and celebrate that feast because it is a true celebration of God's provision and His grace and His goodness to us in the kingdom. And understanding all of that the kingdom is the fulfillment of the Feast of Booths. The Feast of Booths was intended for you to be able to think towards a permanent abode. What then reason would you have not to go? That's the what if. So in the rest of this, that's a big bunch of text for one little point, but it's basically all saying one thing. So we're going to work that part pretty quick. Should any of the families of the earth, first general, families of the earth, not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of armies, rain will not fall on them. So this is a pilgrimage feast for everybody. I mean, I don't know if Ben Gurion Airport's going to make it through the tribulation, but somewhere there'll be a way to get to Israel. And if there's not, then you know, God doesn't expect you to do what you can't do. But if you can possibly make it, you got to make it as a family. Now, it's possible here that family here is referring to the bigger family, the tribal family. But if whatever that family group is, you're not going to get rained on. And if you think about the smallest unit of the idea of the family, which is the local family, imagine you don't go, but you could have, and your neighbor goes, and for the next year, every rain, I feel like this sometimes too, every rain cloud that comes by, you can see the wall of water. Boy, they're getting it. I'm not. Can you imagine the sinking feeling, the prayer, the confession? Sorry, Jesus, give me some rain. That's what it says, though. You're not going to get rained on. That's pretty rough. But you snubbed your nose at what God has given you. That's the picture. And He's going to say, fine, I just won't give you the rain to make you enjoy, let you enjoy what it is I've given you. And by this time next year, I bet you'll find a way to get here and give your gratitude. Verse 18, He singles out Egypt. If the people of Egypt won't go up and enter, the rain won't fall on them. This is the plague. It's the punishment of Egypt, again, and the nations that don't go up to celebrate. So generally nations, but He specifies Egypt. If they won't go up, rain don't fall on the whole country. And that's true of all nations, but then He says Egypt again. And the question is, why is Egypt singled out? The most likely answer I can come up with is the Feast of Booths was instituted in response to their freedom from Egypt. Egypt probably doesn't care about this particular feast because this is the feast that celebrates the fact that God rescued them and kept them in temporary abodes until He got them to their permanent home. Maybe the Egyptians would see that as a failure, an embarrassment of history, and think, I'm not going to celebrate that. But that would be a mistake. Then our last bullet. This is interesting. We got to hit this fast. On that day, the words holy to the Lord will be on the bells of the horses. The pots in the house of the Lord will be like the sprinkling basins before the altar. Every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah will be holy to the Lord of armies. All who sacrifice will come and use the pots to cook in. And on that day, there will no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord of armies. So, a lot going on here, but it's really kind of simple. Obviously, on that day, our context is the same. It's the Messianic kingdom. Holy to the Lord is on the bells of the horses. Now, that doesn't make any sense unless you study a little bit and try to find where that comes from. And it comes from Exodus 28. Exodus 28 is when Aaron is given instructions on the priestly garb. He's the first high priest. You know, there's not like there's a high priest, outlet store somewhere where you can go get the stuff you need. They made everything by hand, and God gave them very careful, very articulate instructions on how to deck out the high priest. And verse 36 talks about his headgear. You're to make a pure gold medallion and engrave it like the engraving of a seal, holy to the Lord. So that is inscribed on the headpiece of the high priest. In the kingdom, who's our high priest? Jesus, absolutely. He's our high priest today. But He's our high priest in the kingdom. And the picture here is that sacred aspect of that article that only the high priest would wear, Holy to the Lord, by the way, the idea of holiness, we've talked about this before, means consecrated or dedicated of use. To be holy means this thing exists purely for God's use in this scenario. That's the point of all of this. You don't take the holy articles in the temple and throw a party with them. Ask Belshazzar how that turns out. Yeah, seriously. Yeah, the whole kingdom fell that night that he did that, you know, and the Persians snuck in under the wall and killed them all. You don't party with God's holy articles from the temple. So here it says that holiest of holy things that was on the headpiece of the high priest is going to be on the bells of the horses. The idea there is you put a band of bells around horses so that as they're navigating, this is obviously old language, it's an old prophet, but as they're moving about, you hear and you know their proximity, and the bells of their horses is going to say, holy to the Lord. The point of that is everything is holy to the Lord. Everything in Israel is considered just as holy as the high priest's headgear, even the bells around the horses' necks. And it goes on and elaborates. The pots in the house of the Lord will be like the sprinkling basins before the altar. Those are both, you might argue both of those are holy, but they're not the same. In the Mosaic covenant, there are distinctions between what's holy and what's common. And the holy things are to be adored in a sense that they're protected, they're preserved. The table of the showbread, you know, these things are very, very special. Well, the basin before the altar is where you caught the blood from the sacrifices. This, you know, Paul talks in Romans 9 about what if God carefully crafted one pot for noble purposes and one pot for ignoble purposes? That literally means a pot to eat out of and a pot to pee in. That's literally what he's saying, because that's what an ignoble purpose for a pot was. It's in the corner. You know, when you show up in first century Israel, where, you know, you got a bathroom, yeah, that pot right there, you know. That's how you do it, and at the end of the day, make sure nobody's coming and toss it out the window. It'll be fine. Actually, if they're obeying the law of Moses, they wouldn't do that. But so, the pots in the house of the Lord are like the sprinkling basins, and that pot's not quite that ignoble, but it's the blood-catching pot is like the sprinkling basin, is like the pots in the house of the Lord. The pot that carries the coals and the pot that carries the what do you call it? The smelly stuff. I can't think of that. Sorry? Incense. Thank you. These things that are dedicated only for those purposes might as well be the pot they catch the blood in. And so again, all of Israel's holy is the picture. 21, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah will be holy to the Lord of armies. Every pot everywhere. Why? Because every household in Israel dedicated to the Lord. And all who sacrifice will come and use the pots to cook in. So not only is every pot in Jerusalem holy, they're worthy for service at any point in time, not only for you know, the service of the Lord, but to cook in or whatever. And by the way, yes, it does say sacrifice. And I know you're thinking, what kind of sacrifices are in the kingdom? That's really a whole nother subject. But there is a sacrificial system in the kingdom. It is not punitive. The blood atonement for sin has been made. The king's standing there. He made his atonement and he was resurrected. I'm preaching that Sunday. And it's not about that. It's a remembrance. These sacrifices continue to remind people, this is your heritage. This is the price of sin. And by the way, the king that's standing right over there behind all that, he fulfilled all this. But we do this as a remembrance, like we do the Lord's Supper. So there will be sacrifices on that day. And if you come in for that purpose, you can use any pot you want because the whole country is dedicated to the Lord. And the last sentence, and this is the most strange way to end the book, it seems, on the face value. On that day, there will no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord of armies. Peace out. I wonder if he signed it, Zach. I don't know, but that's it. That's the last statement. All of this book, we haven't mentioned a Canaanite. The end of all of it, he says, oh, and there are no Canaanites. What is that all about? Well, two key thoughts. First of all, Canaanite and house of the Lord. The Canaanites were the dispossessed people of Israel. Now, they were one of a bunch of ites, Jebusites, Perizzites, and all those other ites. But the Canaanites were noted to be particularly bad. Leviticus 18 says, the people in the land prior to you committed detestable acts, and the land's become defiled. And in Deuteronomy 20, Israelites were told to exterminate them along with the other ites that they encountered as they were taking possession of the land. If you follow Old Testament history, you know that they never quite pulled that off. A couple of times, they intentionally spared some. Saul got judged for that and lost his kingdom. So God had said to exterminate, but that didn't happen. But there won't be any in the house of the Lord. Now, the Canaanites throughout biblical history were there. We see them at all points in Old Testament history, and they were probably, well, we know they were around, and they're around today, not as Canaanites, but we have something today that's magical. It's called DNA. We'll get to that in a second. But they have always been around. Their presence continually corrupted Israel, continually. They fell into the sin of the Canaanites and all the other ites. Canaanites may be more of a general term, but they're a big name among them. And here it says, no Canaanite will be in the temple, and yet here everything in the land is holy to the Lord. So if a Canaanite's not able to be in a temple, but the pot that's in the temple is just as holy as the pot on your kitchen table, I think pretty strongly what's being said here is there are no Canaanites in the land at all, quite possibly at least. Now the question is, are we talking about actual Canaanites, or are we saying you're all holy, that whole Canaanite plague that caused you to fail over and over again won't be there at all? So are we being general, symbolic, poetic, or are we being specific? Y'all know me. I'm real big on David L. Cooper's plain sense makes sense, seek no other sense. In this case, I'm not sure the plain sense does make sense. It makes sense as far as it's written. It doesn't make sense as far as a fulfillment. And the reason it doesn't is the Canaanites so permeated the land, and you notice, I thought I put that in your notes, but I don't see it in your notes. I don't see it in your notes. Modern DNA analysis say that Jews and Arabs who live in Israel today, everyone they've tested has 50% Canaanite blood in their DNA. So now the question becomes, at what point's a Canaanite, and at what point's he a Jew? Because even the Jews have Canaanite blood in them. Why? You know why. You've read the stories. So Canaanite blood is everywhere. I don't know that it's speaking specifically there's not going to be a drop of Canaanite blood in the land. I think he's saying that the whole Canaanite principle, the paganism, everything that defiled you, everything that drew you away from me, everything that I ended up judging you for repeatedly is gone. Your pot in your house is as holy as the temple article. No Canaanite business going on. That's the way probably that's meant to read. And it makes the most sense in the context that he ends the book that way. Questions, comments?